Today, we are living in one of the most transforming periods in world history. It's both exciting and scary. We're talking about artificial intelligence, and it's not just for wartime games, vacuum cleaners, and self-driving cars. It's now coming to the art world. As a professional photographer, I've been bombarded with a bunch of awesome images online through social media platforms. All of these images that I'm seeing are incredibly impressive, but what does this mean for art? Is everyone an artist? Is photography dead? Are we all gonna be replaced by prompt writers? Today I'm gonna sit down with photographer Pi Jerza and have a discussion on how this incredibly disruptive art form is changing our entire world. Welcome to the crazy and wild world of AI digital art. All right, guys, before we get into this video, there's a little bit of housekeeping I want to go through. First off, Fstoppers is running a brand new Critique the Community, where 3 lucky winners will be able to pick any one of our tutorials at fstoppers.com/store. The theme for this contest is shockingly AI art, so anyone can enter. Simply head over to fstoppers.com/contests. You can upload 3 of your own images quickly and easily. And if you've never made AI art, no worries. Head to the description below and you can check out 4 of my favorite AI art generators so that you can participate in this crazy brand new art form. Finally, this video is sponsored by Tamron's brand new 28-75 f2.8 G2 lens, which improves on one of the most highly praised video and photography lenses on the market. This lens is unique because instead of a traditional 24-70 zoom range, it's biased slightly more towards the telephoto side, which makes it a little bit better for portraits, weddings, or other genres that benefit from just a little extra reach. The brand new VXD linear motor allows for quiet, high speed, and high precision autofocus. And with a minimum focusing distance of just 7.1 inches, you can remain extremely close to your subject while getting that shallow depth of field and that wide angle field of view. Other exciting features on this fast 2.8 zoom lens include enhanced focusing and zoom rings for improved handling, and a new USB port for firmware updates and lens adjustments, calibrations, and you can even customize the autofocus lock button found on the side of the lens. And this new lens maintains the same low weight as the original, coming in at just 19 ounces. You can click the link in the description below to learn even more about this lens, but for now, sit back and relax, enjoy my conversation with Mr. Pi Jerza. All right, here we are. We finally got this together. I've been wanting to do this conversation with you for a while.
Yeah.
And as we start this, I'm just gonna have a bunch of the AI art that both you and I have created over the last couple of weeks show up on the screen. I think your work is a little more interesting than some of the stuff I've made. A lot of what I've been creating is like crazy, wild keywords just to see what it's capable of making.
Yeah.
Where it feels like your work has a little bit more thought behind the final product.
I don't know about that. I got lots of crazy ones too. I did What If Yoda Was a Basketball Player?
I ran that exact same prompt to see what my version would look like compared to yours.
Was it similar?
Here. It's actually a little similar, but I feel like yours turned out better.
Huh.
Which gets into the crafting of prompts, which I'm sure we will talk about here in a bit. For those of you who don't know, Pi Jerza is an incredible photographer. You've started several different companies. You primarily do wedding photography, but you've also done photography education, much like our company, Fstoppers. And recently you've started a completely different business that is kind of focused on relationships.
Yeah, I wanted to start doing more like broad audience education, like that wasn't just in one specific niche like photography. So we have all of that, all of our photography education, everything. Now we're kind of going into more broad subjects. The first one, relationships. I want to cover business. I want to cover marketing, kind of all those independent skills that have helped us to be successful in like our careers and creating companies.
So I think talking with you is really interesting because you've done some conceptual artwork through photography. You also take very realistic photos in terms of capturing somebody's wedding day. But then also you're an incredible marketer and you have all of these other businesses that you're potentially going to use AI art to promote as well. So
yeah,
the first thing I wanted to jump right into is kind of give an overview of maybe like the traditional definitions of what art is, because I think it's going to be really important to know perhaps what art is and isn't while we have this conversation of, if AI art is completely, changing the world that we live in.
Yeah, it's probably also worth like talking about what even is AI art, because I feel like it's so new that when I tell people all you do is basically type in a few words and then the computer basically creates an image from nothing, they're like, what are you talking about? I don't understand. And it literally is exactly that. You type in this, what we call a prompt. So you'd say, whatever application you're using, it's a little bit different in each one, but you might say /imagine. And then you just start typing out. I actually have one that's like, seeing the mysteries of the universe while standing on the planet Vormir from Avengers. And the AI will literally create whatever that is based on, I'm sure at this point it has processed millions, if not billions of images. And it's basically combining and mixing and matching to create these images. And so you put in details, you put in prompts, then it gives you some ideas. You pick, oh yeah, this is close, and I want to do different versions of this. And you just kind of keep guiding it through these iterations until you land on what is something oftentimes pretty incredible, something that is far superior than anything I could do on my own. Yeah, it's kind of a wild, I don't know. I feel like when people first started telling you about it, didn't it kind of sound like, wait, that's possible? Like you put words in and it gives you an image?
It feels like this appeared out of nowhere overnight. And I think for a lot of our audience, they're already dabbling in this. But what I've learned from people outside of the art and photography world, my wife and people around me, they have no idea what this is yet. So in a lot of ways, the mass public probably isn't even exposed to this yet. Totally. Even though people like you and I are going into these chat rooms and seeing thousands of pieces created every second, this is going to be a very new technology for a lot of people, and they may not even find out until months from when we're recording this.
Totally. So basically, with no skill whatsoever, and I fancy myself a creative, but I don't feel like I'm an artist necessarily. I feel like I've learned a medium of photography and how to create stuff there, but I was never good at drawing. I was never good at painting. My art teacher told me I should quit. Like those are part of the things that I frequently say. Like I was never good at those things. And yet AI suddenly makes me better than most artists. Like with all I got to do is imagine it.
Well, I think I would disagree, and a lot of people would disagree, that you're not an artist, because I think your work over the years has been incredible. But let's step back. I'm going to just read 3 definitions that I've pulled off the internet so that we can kind of debate. So the Oxford Dictionary says the expression or application of human creative skill and imagination, typically in a visual form such as painting or sculpture, producing works to be appreciated primarily for their beauty or emotional power. I'm just going to go off and read 2 more. Britannica says a visual object or experience consciously created through the expression of skill or imagination can be separated on a scale from aesthetic art versus utilitarian. That would just be, art for the sake of creating something versus like a welder or a carpenter, somebody who's building what you could consider with function, right?
Yeah.
And then Wikipedia says a diverse range of human activity and resulting product that involves creative or imaginative talent expressing technological proficiency, beauty, emotional power, or conceptual ideas.
It's weird because every one of those definitions gets more and more broad. Like the last one is like, you could say the way that you code software could be art. Dancing can be art, just like, thinking of a new approach to a legal strategy could be considered art. It's literally anything could be that. But why do you feel like, by the way, I don't know, on a side note, does it not feel like every time we go to a definition of something, I get reminded of like high school essays? Like, don't start the essay with a definition of something. But
well, I was thinking, here I am quoting Wikipedia, which is what everybody does today. But there was a time when Wikipedia was so new that it wasn't to be trusted. And now in many ways, Wikipedia is, all of these different opinions that kind of form the mass opinion of society, which is a whole different argument.
But why does the definition of art even matter? Because I don't think nobody, when looking or appreciating something, nobody thinks of the definition. It doesn't really matter. It's just, it either is or it isn't something that we appreciate.
Yeah, I don't know that I really even cared about the definition of art until we got to the point where something that you have very little control over is actually producing the output. And for me, I'm seeing a lot of people on social media who are saying, oh my gosh, I'm finally able to create art even though I'm not an artistic person. And that makes me think, well, is that undermining, the artist and what we consider art?
Yeah.
One thing in reading all three of those definitions that I think is really interesting, even though you say they're getting more and more broad, all three of them include humanity, talent or skill, and imagination. So if you take out, talent or skill, are you really an artist? If you take out imagination from it, or in this case, humanity, we're very, very close with AI art having no humanity involved at all. We're just throwing in a few keywords. That's our contribution. But for the most part, this is software. And you could make the argument that the software itself is built through human, activity. But the whole idea behind artificial intelligence is that it doesn't need to rely on humans anymore. It's actually building this system through learning and pulling things off the internet and creating something that's truly unique in and of itself.
Yeah. So I would definitely say that, and I'm going to kind of pull, I had another conversation with a friend of ours, Pratik, which will be a different episode on Adorama TV that kind of has a different part of this conversation. But one of the things that we both kind of agreed on is that we don't necessarily feel like artists when we're using this tool. We feel more like, Pratik's word was like a director, which I would agree with, like you're a director. I also feel like it's very much curation. It's putting in some words and directing an initial thing and then curating to get to your vision, essentially. But that's what it feels like, as opposed to like, it doesn't feel like creating necessarily, or like art.
Yeah. I was thinking, after reading these definitions, there's an artist, there's a lot of artists have done this, but there's one, Jans Hanning. He recently did this project, it's called Take the Money and Run, where he was commissioned by a museum to do this other type of art that he's done before, and I don't remember the number. They gave him like $40,000, and his art that he returned to them was blank canvases.
Yeah.
And he titled it "Take the Money and Run," which is like the social commentary on, I actually didn't do any art.
Yeah.
But you've seen this before, where somebody turns in a blank canvas and, oh, that's the art. And you think, well, is there any skill or imagination involved in that? There might be human input, but over the decades, we've kind of considered that art. Or the guy who, staples the banana to the wall, and now all of a sudden it's in MoMA, the Modern Art Museum in New York. Mm-hmm. And you're like, well, is that art? So there's definitely been things that have trended and teetered on the edge of what most of us would probably consider art, but maybe it's not for us to totally decide.
Yeah, I think the definition is very difficult to wrap my head around, because again, going back like completely outside of any visual medium, the way that somebody from how they play piano can be art, to how somebody argues a legal argument can be art. Like that, it might not be appreciated by anyone that doesn't understand it, but it's still a form of creative expression. So I feel like that term has to be broadened dramatically. And then the human element, it feels like, well, the definition was written before AI had a really say in it. So I don't know if that's going to stay, but I do agree, like the skill and talent piece, I'm curious, like what's going to happen with that, because to be completely honest, like a successful, when Instagram was photographs, right? When it was primarily image based, a big part of your social media ability is curation. It's what you actually show, and making sure that what you're posting is resonating with the people that you want to communicate with. So a huge part of the artistic process is the actual curation of like the message itself and like what we're trying to do. I very much see that as staying, as like, to be honest, I see that as the last remaining skill. Like curation and directing is going to be the last remaining skill, along with your ability to conceptualize and bring something into a physical or digital form. But the technical skill, that to me is going to go away completely. Like on this point of like defining, sticking with that definition of it requiring skill, let me just ask you, what child 5 years from now would spend 10 years learning how to draw when a few words gets them a beautiful image? Like, what is the, we're all driven by this immediate need for satisfaction and immediate gratification. What parent is going to be able to convince their child to stick with something for a decade when literally any program can do exactly that thing?
It's very much the same argument I had with my teachers on why do I need to do this without a calculator when I have a calculator, not knowing that 10 years later, we would all have calculators on us at all times that can answer not just a simple math question, but any question that you could possibly have. And so I find what's interesting about this is I feel like my vocabulary is very narrow, or a lot of times you want to type in words that reference other genres or directors or art styles, and I find myself stumbling thinking like, I know what this image looks like. I have an image here of yours. If divorce was a portal to new life, photorealistic. You didn't use a lot of really descriptive keywords there, but if I wanted to produce this image, I'm sure there are artistic genres and artists that I could reference that I just don't know. And so in some ways, all of this is falling back on being even more tapped into culture and having a wider vocabulary so that you can put in the most specific keywords in the shortest amount of phrases to get the final output that you want.
Yeah, I think that will be a skill in and of itself in terms of like, so I got the invites to these applications like maybe for the betas, like maybe a few months ago. And I kind of ignored them because 3 to 6 months ago, you weren't creating, like it was very, you'd see AI artwork and it was, okay, this is cool, but this isn't like crazy. But then I got serious about it like a month ago when I started seeing people creating almost photorealistic type imagery, and the way that AI is improving is so crazy. The pace of it is absolutely insane because this machine is learning at a pace that, you put 100,000 humans together. That's the pace that it's learning at. And so what it can do is absolutely incredible. And the skill becomes like learning how to control the AI, understanding the prompts, knowing, like you said, what other artists and mediums, and, you can literally type in phrases like, I'm sure you know who Hokusai is, or at least you've seen he was a Japanese artist that painted those minimalistic kind of waves and those type of imagery. I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but you could type into the AI, give me the Ermei Mountains in China, but in Hokusai's style. It'll take his style of painting and then apply it to something completely different. I did one where, and I'll give you these images, you can show them. I did one that was, one of my favorite artists is MC Escher. So I did, what if MC Escher illustrated hell as a depiction? And it comes back and you're like, dude, that is something that looks like what MC Escher would create. And that's insane. And we're in the phase that this is a beta. Like, this is a year from now, it's going to be doing things that are so far beyond. Again, you take the speed of 100,000 humans learning something. That's the speed it's going to grow at. So the ability to control this then becomes knowing exactly what's out there, the words that you need to use, increasing your vocabulary, understanding different like mediums, genres, all of that, and being able to combine it. And that is most certainly a skill, but it's a skill that I was able to become okay at in a week. Like the average person can learn that skill. Maybe if they start from ground zero, it takes them a month or maybe even a year. But now with that skill, you can create any type of work you want in any style of illustration. Whereas previously it would take you a decade just to be good at one type of illustration or one type of style.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, speaking on this, I'm looking at your map of hell here, and this is one of the most detailed pieces of AI art that I've seen, where I find myself just, wandering through the whole image. Mm-hmm. A lot of images that I've created are not quite as detailed. Maybe that's just because I haven't spent the time of uploading them and really massaging them into the final piece. But a lot of times I just say, I look at it and I'm like, oh, there's this novelty of, oh, that's kind of funny. Yeah. But then it's not really that interesting. What I wanted to ask you was, I have struggled with this algorithm in trying to create something that's in my mind and get the output to look like that. Instead, what I find is that I have an idea of something that would be interesting to me, but then the output is completely different. And I'm kind of taking what the AI creates, and then I'm just funneling it down and curating it and massaging it into the best version of that initial idea that the prompt creates. And so it's a completely different skill set, and it's a completely different form of creativity. I am not creating anything that really looks like what I imagined. Lee was just saying, my business partner, Lee Morris, was saying that there's this evil duck that keeps attacking him and his kids. So right before we got on this talk, I typed in, evil duck, sends kids screaming from duck pond. Mm-hmm. And I did the prompt about 5 different times, 5 different ways, and not one of them really captured what I was seeing in my head. And so I think that is one big difference that I've experienced. Have most of your prompts ended up vaguely in the realm of what you intended for them to look like?
A lot of them do. I think that just comes down to getting proficient at like describing it in a way that can be interpreted. So like as you're thinking of like that evil duck, do you have a particular style of animation or a particular look for that duck that resembles? So it comes back to your knowledge base, like what you said earlier, your knowledge base of what already exists. I need to point it to something. If I want to get close to my vision, then I need to point it to something that already exists and then modify from that, which means that I could also upload a source image. So if I have a source image of my own, I could actually upload that as a place to kind of begin with too. But yeah, the ability to control it comes down to your ability to basically take what you're imagining and actually describe it through words, which is that's a skill in and of itself. I don't know if you ever did this, but in elementary school, in 6th grade, my teacher did an English exercise where she said, I want you guys to understand how to actually describe something. So she put a peanut butter jar on the table, and then she put a bag of bread, a knife, and jelly. And she said, I want you to write out how to make a peanut butter jelly sandwich, right? And so you start with, every child says, well, take the bread and put the peanut butter on it. Well, so she literally takes the bag of bread and places the peanut butter jar like on top of the bag of bread. She's like, okay, now what? And then the students are like, no, that's not what we mean. You gotta open the bread and then put the peanut butter on it. And then she does exactly that, right? Opens it, puts it inside. So it reminded me of exactly that, where the skill is defining out something through a logical series of words that really can't be misunderstood. But there's also an excitement about just typing in random words and like, what do you come up with too? Like so you can kind of play on both sides of it. Like I'm going to give it just a certain number of words and see what it comes up with. And then I'm going to give it more on this side to get it close to what vision I already have.
Yeah, and I find that to be the most challenging part of it is I haven't done this long enough to really, become skilled at that. And I'm using the word skilled as if this, takes, what is the quote that, you do 10,000 hours before you get good and master something?
Yeah.
There's a chance with this, you could master this in a whole lot less than 10,000 hours. But I don't know if that's really crossing the threshold of making you now a skilled AI prompt writer versus somebody who just gets lucky and the AI points to something that it knows or grabs from something that it already knows. One of the more successful pieces that I made, and I don't know that I upsized it enough, was I did something like demonic Disney Snow White and the Seven Dwarves. Uh-huh. And I think because there's just so many things that it can pull from Snow White and Disney, the results are like awesome and horrifying. And I wish I had uploaded it. I got to figure out like how to go back and high res the file after the script has been old. I don't know if I can do that, but it's like you said, if it knows the sources to pull from, you wind up with a much more interesting final product than if you leave it a little bit more ambiguous. It's not really capable of doing that quite yet.
Totally.
Before we get too far into the weeds here, I think a lot of our audience, they're photographers and they're curious to know, what is AI art going to do for photography? Is it going to completely destroy it? Is it something that they can incorporate into their own photography? And I know one argument we've all had that I think we should touch on a little bit here before we get too far into this is photography itself art? Because when I debate about AI art and is it art and are you an artist to people who are not photographers, the idea that, well, photography is not really an art, you're just there pushing a button, and how is this any different? And I think it would be fun to kind of dive into our view of photography, because I think, I believe you and I think it's an artistic form. and that it has a skill set involved. And so I have a few little notes here that I wrote. Does photography require skill and imagination? One of my buddies was saying, no, you're just out there taking a picture of the sunset. Like, what skill and imagination is involved in that? And it made me think, how would I counter that?
I definitely feel like photography can either be not art or it can be art. It can be one or the other. Like, to me, if you're going out and simply documenting what's in front of you with very little thought to curation, adjusting, creativity, then really the artist is the engineers that made the camera, right? It's the sensor, it's like everything that's being captured, because you're simply documenting basically what's there, and the camera is that medium. But then you have photography that goes very far beyond like what you see with the naked eye, that you're incorporating lighting and compositional elements and different things to make that unique. And you can do this to any degree. I mean, you can do it like as a wedding photographer who does it with portraits. You could do it to the degree of like Aaron Nace, who takes an image and turns it into like something that's composite related. Or then there's like Tim Tatter, who does incredible commercial sports and portrait work. It's impossible to say that none of those are art. Like it is very much art. Photography is the medium, but it is art. But it's not the same as like, if you walk up and you just take a picture of someone with an iPhone, or you just capture a sunset. I don't feel like that's art.
Right. I think what the phone has done is it's put a camera in everyone's hands, and then teamed up with social media and Instagram. It's given people a platform to share this art on such a wide scale that maybe you could argue that the art has depreciated a little bit. Although I see now these Instagram models who are producing great portraits. They're edited well, they're shot well, they're curated well, they've put the mood in the scene, and a lot of it is just crazy extravagant lifestyles, or it's just sex appeal. Mm-hmm. But in that small little window of things, they've done an incredible job, making me wish that I was, in Greece on this amazing vacation. So they've done that very well. I think you've hit it on the head with the idea that, a real photographer is able to take something that the average person doesn't see or imagine, and be able to capture it in a very concise, well-curated, well-designed, well-directed form. And so I have this quote from Greg Heisler, who is a photographer that we all respect. I remember he said this at some convention in New York. It's basically, in the past, photographers were hired to simply be technicians. Mm-hmm. Someone who understood how a camera worked and how to create technically sound images with exposure, focus, lens choice, all of that sort of thing. Yeah. But today, people are not hired for that. People are hired for their creative ideas, their ability to work with talent, how to direct a photo shoot, how to pull interest out of a person. Like Peter Hurley, he's able to get that amazing headshot. And so the art with photography is not how to set everything and hit the button and actually capture it, and maybe you have other people around you that are directing what's happening in front of that camera. You are now the director, and the camera almost doesn't matter. I mean, you could show up, how much is filmed on an iPhone now? Yeah. There's actual positions where you have to take behind the scenes social media on the phone just so that it can have that look, or so that it can get up quickly on the internet. And so I think the camera as a technical standpoint doesn't matter at all. We all know how to do this. It comes down to what are you able to think up and create, and that's where the artistry is really, it has its worth.
Yeah, for sure. I think if you're not doing that, then you're basically a journalist. If you're simply walking up to something and documenting it, that's journalism. But going and creating something that doesn't actually exist, and that includes, like you said, like Peter Hurley's ability to direct, that expression, the lighting, the portrait, that doesn't exist without someone on the other side of the camera. And so I would include that in like the definition of like what is artistry, right? But more and more, Gregory Heisler's definition of that has to be updated as well, because now photographers aren't just, the visual artists and the creative. They're also an extension of the marketing arm. Like photographers are being hired because of the platforms that they create and the people that follow them. So we keep getting more added to what the expectations are as a photographer or creative professional.
Absolutely. It's pretty wild, the job of a photographer now. I mean, how many people just hire you because of your following, you know? Like they
Totally.
love your photography. It looks great, but it's kind of similar to 20 other people. But if you have the audience and you can create that, you know, that extra little spark, that's a huge part of the equation now. Where before, I mean, we used to license based on your reach. Who are you sending it to and how are you publishing it? I'm going to actually make money doing that. And that still occurs today, but now so much of that weight is on our shoulders, which has definitely changed the name of the game.
Yeah.
Going back to just like you were talking about, you know, capturing what's in front of you or photojournalism, I don't want to have anyone watching or listening to this think that that's not an art either. And I think of people like Elia Liccardi, who takes the same landscape shot that millions of people have taken, many times the most beautiful shot, is now designated with a sign that says, stand here, this is the shot. But a lot of what makes his work so great is knowing what time of year to go there, when the best light is gonna happen, how to, in his case, he merges, you know, the best blue hour, but then he also takes later shots where the city lights are on and he can combine them, which is kind of a Photoshop skill. But for many people, you could show up at the right time with the right weather and the perfect time when the cherry blossoms are in bloom, and it could just be by chance you are there at the best time. Perhaps you actually find yourself standing next to Elia. But for people like him who take this very seriously and this is their art, they've factored in all of this. They've factored in the focal length, the time of day, the exposure, you know, the shutter length. How long is that shutter going to be open? Can they blur the clouds? Like there's so much artistry going in that the average person might just say, man, you just took a picture of nature's beauty.
Yeah.
What did you possibly do that was artistic in that moment? And then on the other side of the coin, I think, you know, we didn't really talk about this, but the photojournalism, you know, you're a wedding photographer, there's so much of that skill involved to where you might take one shot and get lucky, or you might have taken 20 shots right back to back, but you've curated just the one perfect moment of that kiss where their face isn't going in, it's not sloppy, it's not awkward, his eyes aren't still open. You found that moment where everything comes together and the kiss is beautiful. And, you know, if you're doing war photography, there's a lot of moments where it's not quite as exciting as that apex moment. Sports photography, you know, when they actually catch the ball. And so I think even with photojournalism, there's definitely a skill set there. And, you know, there's an imagination. How am I going to shoot this? Do I want the crowd behind the football player, or do I want, you know, the cheerleaders there? You know, like that little bit of artistic design makes such a huge difference that even something like photojournalism,
Yeah, I mean,
I would argue has a huge art value as well.
I would say, like, I mean, first, who am I to define anything? These are just kind of thoughts and opinions on my side. But like, when I think of photojournalism, I think of like what Elia Liccardi does and what a good landscape photographer does, to me, is art. And to me, that is not photojournalism, because you're taking a scene and you're trying to make it the best it could possibly be by controlling various elements, including time of day and going at the right time of weather. And then you're editing and doing, you know, all this work to make it what it is. That is art to me, for sure. If you were to define it though, like, I don't believe that photojournalism is supposed to be art. Meaning, like, when we talk about journalism, if we were to go back to a kind of purist sense of the word, it's news, it's war journalism, it's showing events as they actually are. And journalists will get hammered all the time, a photojournalist, for doing any type of editing or manipulation or even curation of what's shown in the frame, right? Because you have to imagine that, like, just simply choosing what's framed in versus framed out is also an element of creative control. But the whole concept of photojournalism was to show what's real. And that's why I'm saying that I would exclude art. There most certainly is skill and talent in being at the right place in the right time. But I'm saying that the definition of photojournalism is that it is not supposed to be a creative expression. It's supposed to be a realistic expression of what's happening. That, you know, how many wartime pictures have been just picked apart along with the photographers that took them because out of frame, there was somebody doing something to make it more dramatic. like that's not okay. You know what I mean? That's creative control, not documentary control. So that's where I would draw the distinction between them. Like, are we serving a documentary journalistic function that it's not art, it's realism? Or are we going and creating something that doesn't exist? And the person that's just walking out and snapping a picture with their phone, that's who I'm saying, like, if there's no thought in an image that you're taking, it's not art. Going back to like the impact of this AI artwork over photography, and this area, it's going to be massive. Not only just in the definitions of art, and what we perceive at, but my background is a heavy part of my background is psychology, and just within a few short weeks of using AI programs, I've already seen in myself another level of diminishing in terms of like value of an image. Like remember when images were printed and everything was on a wall, you would take time. And then social media came along. And then, with social media and Instagram, you'd give each image now one that you would have stood in front of for 30 seconds or a minute. Now you're giving them 2 seconds, as you scroll. Well, I felt in me like another shift with AI where I was able to create so much that not only am I browsing through things quicker, but the first thought in my mind is, did someone make this or is it AI? And that's a weird thought. Like, I saw the James Webb telescope photos that have been traveling around the past few weeks.
Yeah.
I saw one of those after getting kind of deep into AI, and I didn't even read the caption. The first thing that I thought was, oh, that's a really cool AI image. Then I read the caption and go, oh no, that's actually a real photograph. Like, this medium is going to completely transform every visual medium, because when it's so easy to create something visually impactful, the overall value of every visual medium starts to drop, because there's just that much more of it. It's that much more to sift through. And now the expectation of something impressive goes up even higher. And it's going to be across the board. Across the board, the expectation of anything considered art is going to go up when everybody has the ability to create this. I mean, how long is it going to be before, I'm guessing that within 3 to 5 years, these Photoshop skills, right? Like being able to take an image and dodge and burn and composite and create this incredible thing. 3 to 5 years tops before you can take a photograph, just a plain photograph shot in a studio, feed it into a computer and say, I want you to take this person, dodge and burn, fix skin, make it realistic. I want to swap out the background. I want to do this, place this, adjust the arm. You'll be able to type out everything you want. And then it's done. And what need is there for Photoshop or for spending years learning how to retouch and dodge and burn and do things a proper way? That's the transformation that I kind of see coming. Like, all of these technical skills involved in creating a piece of art, no matter what that art is, the technical ability is going to go away completely. And it's going to be simply down to your vision, your ability to execute, to be able to get it to a real form, and then to curate like what you're delivering and speak to an audience.
Yeah, and I don't know if we're prepared for that yet. It's such a big change. Yeah. Before we get into kind of the debates with is AI art and what it could be great for and what it's not going to be great for, just to kind of put dot the I on this, Lee had a really good, interesting argument about his art photography, and he kind of thought it was more of a spectrum. And in his little argument was that maybe sculpture is the highest form of art because you're taking a block of marble and you're physically having to carve and do this, strenuous thing that takes a lot of time and skill. And then all of a sudden you're left with Michelangelo's David that you look at and you're like, whoa, like he created that. If that's like perhaps in Lee's mind, the most artistic form, then maybe you have painting where you've taken an actual, pigment and put it on a canvas and you've either copied something you see in nature or you've built it in your mind and you've painted it and you've done it. Maybe somewhere in there is like digital art. You've done the same sort of painting with a mouse or tablet and, you've done it on a computer. Maybe from there is photography to some degree. I know we just argued that photography can be a lot of directing and, putting a team together to build something. But, at the end of the day, the skill seems like it's a little bit less than the others. Mm-hmm. And then I mentioned earlier, installing the banana on the wall or producing the blank canvas. Maybe that's like the other spectrum of art. But now with AI, and this is kind of where I want to go from here, with AI, now all of a sudden, where in that spectrum does it fall? And should we even be caring where it falls? And does it matter who produces the art? There's a lot of questions that I have kind of going forward in this conversation about how do we place value on things that aren't 100% controlled by the artists themselves. Or if an artist can just type in the keywords, and I can go here on Midjourney and I can look at your exact keywords. If I copy those, which aren't a copyrightable thing, and just throw them into the algorithm, and it produces maybe a better piece of art using your words, like how do we find value and how do we make sense of something where the human input and skill, and maybe even imagination, is now reduced to something relatively simple and easy to manipulate and perform and craft. But the output now, it's so, you've blown the doors off everything. I mean, like you were just saying, these images are so amazing to look at. There's, it's almost like the teeter-totter is just in one position where there's very little input, but the output is just, ginormous. Is artificial intelligence art unlocking artistic freedom to those who, might not be artistic?
I do believe that it unlocks a lot of creative potential. That's very clear that it does that. I posted this question of like, when it's no longer difficult to take whatever's in your mind and to make it reality, at what point does our imagination cease to be interesting? Like, what point does the art itself lose meaning and our imagination cease to be meaningful? And I posted that, and people had a lot of takes. My take on it is kind of I see a lot of positive and negative coming, and it's hard not to avoid the negative side of it. Like, for a time, it will expand everyone's imagination because you can do crazy things, and you can put Yoda on a basketball court, and you can do all this stuff, right? Everybody's going to start thinking in a way that's completely outside the box, and it's completely capable. And you can even explore things that you wouldn't normally explore. Like the concepts that I've had for artwork that I don't have the time to go and do, but I could actually explore now with this medium. So that's really cool. Like that it brings all this potential and ability. But the other side to this is, with so much being created, the only result has to be a devaluing of everything that exists. And we're only talking about like one stage of this. We're talking about the beta stage of an image-based AI, right? But we already have 3D printers. We already have other mediums where we can control. I have an AI writer that will actually, I can tell the AI, I think it's called Jarvis, and I'll tell it to write me a paragraph in a certain style, and it will do it, and it does a good job. So it's hitting, writing, it's hitting every one of these areas. How far are we away from, you say sculpture is the ultimate form of art. Well, I'm going to say that in 10 years, a 3D printer that's large enough to print a sculpture will probably be in most people's homes. It'll have that ability, and the AI to go along with it will probably say, okay, I'll probably have the ability to say, imagine if Michelangelo did a sculpture of LeBron James. And then the 3D model goes and like prints out that sculpture for me. Now this ultimate form of art, what value does that have now? So that's kind of where I'm seeing it going. There was a Star Trek episode. This is how big of a nerd I am. I love Next Generation Star Trek. And there was one episode where a boy it was a young child had this sculpting device, and it was just a block of wood, and the boy would just imagine something and run this sculpting device over the wood, and the tool would just turn the wood into whatever he was imagining. And so the artistic skill was controlling your imagination as you kind of go and do this thing, right? And that's very much where the artistic skill is going to go. But the question is, in that world, do people really pay for art? That was a world where, the economy of everything was completely shifted. Everyone, their basic needs were met. They have food, they have shelter. The goal was just to better oneself. That's the Star Trek world. And this is where I see things going, is like we're approaching something that's going to dramatically shift the economics of everything. Because I've already started taking concepts in AI and turning them into psychological imagery that I could use for like our psychology podcast, right, on 12-week relationships. I said, I took one of my favorite quotes. Penny Reed said, "Don't light yourself on fire trying to keep others warm." So I told the AI, imagine what it would look like to light yourself on fire to keep others warm. And it spat out this image that I couldn't have done better myself. Like, this was a fantastic photograph. It was this girl that was depicted like a matchstick with her hair on fire. And so in that world, what need do I have to hire someone to do book illustrations, to create whatever imagery I need? If I am a writer of movies, do I really need a storyboard artist, or can I just go use AI to create the visuals that I want so that we can go and make this a reality? Every one of these, where I see this going is that the top 1% of every creative endeavor will be secure. They always have, they always will be, because their function, their role, the value that they bring is in the human element of communicating, understanding someone's vision, and bringing that and transforming it into something that's real, right? That top 1% will be safe. But the 99% of people that are good at what they do, that are technical, that are creative, that are craft oriented, they're done. They're done as writers, they're done as storyboard artists, they're done as illustrators, they're done as, eventually retouchers and photographers. They're done. That's going to be replaced by this ability to do it on your own. So that's kind of there's an awesome capability in terms of opening up creative possibilities and imagination, but then there's the terrifying side of where I see it kind of going. Like the economics are going to have to massively shift, because we have to all figure out, what value can I bring now to this new world where technical ability is solved?
Yeah. I mean, I have a list that I made. Kind of the overall topic is just, where could AI be the most valuable? And you've just listed a bunch of these, like blogs like ours that need images just to represent something abstract, or like your relationship series and everything like that. Book covers. I mean, I'm looking at one here from you, what my life would look like if I listened to what other people said.
Yeah, that was interesting.
How do you come up with that as a photographer? Like, it would definitely not turn out like this image, but I think this image might be more interesting and marketable than what I have spent my whole better part of my life doing as a creative. Like, this might capture that better than something I would come up with. I was just recently at IKEA, and I view IKEA's artwork as like the lowest. Maybe because it's in IKEA, or maybe because it just seems so generic that I'm just like, who would buy this aerial pencil drawing of Manhattan? Like, that just seems like the worst possible thing. But now, I mean, why would IKEA not immediately just start producing so many interesting pieces of artwork? I mean, they could even get it to where they're only printing series of like 10 or 20 of these, or, maybe it's hundreds. Yeah. But every IKEA you go into on every different month, it's like their amount of artwork is completely changed, and you could print it there at the store, and it would be a lot easier to make than having to license this one generic piece of artwork that maybe you and I don't really hold that valuable.
I agree. Now imagine what about the copyright issues of like not just like who owns the AI image, but what about when 2 or 3 or hundreds of artists start creating images that look substantially similar because the AI is pulling from the similar source material?
Well, I want to get into copyright here in a minute. I think we're going to wrap the whole thing up with copyright, because there's a lot of crazy stuff with that. But, in talking about where it could be valuable, and this is kind of, we'll jump here in a minute into how it's going to be horrifying. But another crazy place that it's going to be super valuable is with the biggest advertisers like Facebook and Google. I mean, imagine now if they can take all of those cookies and all of the follow ads and everything that you're doing online, and now target you very specifically with AI art that's capable of coming up with a creative to throw in front of you. I mean, a lot of my feed, we're about to have a baby, so a lot of it is baby stuff, but it's always guitar stuff, it's always photography stuff. But imagine when the algorithm itself can create the perfect image to stop me from scrolling and say, oh my gosh, Fender has a new guitar. Yeah. Or, whatever it could be.
It could do it on the fly based on who you are.
And in some ways, depending on how you look at advertising, you might say this is super exciting because now I'm only going to be targeted to the things I'm truly interested in. That might be the more optimistic look. And then the more pessimistic look would be like, oh my gosh, like it's going to figure out my inner thoughts and being better than any creative director and advertising agency out there. I'm going to get bombarded with even more ads that have, a goal of getting me to spend money, and they're going to be more effective than ever before. So depending on, where you fall on that side of the coin, that's how AI is going to be valuable. Now, just to kind of play devil's advocate here, and I think truly I'm a little more pessimistic about AI art, and I'm a little more scared and worried about it, but where AI art won't be valuable, and I've made a few examples here to just kind of make this a little more interesting, is news where actual facts are to be trusted and valued. And so I threw in into this AI creator, what it would look like if Kyiv was bombed with tanks in the streets. And I came up with this image here that shows, a representation of Ukraine on fire with explosions. And then the actual real photograph, one that I just found that was used recently with the war between Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah.
The one on the left, it has value in the sense that it is exciting and maybe it's graphically more interesting, but it does not represent reality at all. And of course, the algorithm right now is in such a primitive, you keep saying beta stage, that it doesn't look real yet. But the one on the right is what actually happened and probably the news agencies ran with, but it's not going to be long before you're not going to be able to distinguish. But at the moment, it seems like photography and photojournalism is still going to be held for the news organizations, whereas AI may not quite be as valuable yet if we want to see the factual truth of what actually happened.
But I think you're hitting on an important piece, which is like the general effect that AI generated anything is going to have is that there's going to be an increase in value in anything substantive, anything real, anything physical. So what's going to be interesting is like when the creative aspect when the technical aspect of creation is all done, then how much more valuable is it going to be to go to a concert where an artist is actually performing live, right? Because like let's take AI into a different space, into music. How long is it going to be before I can say, imagine this song, give it a beats per minute and give it an example guitar and give it whatever, and it spits out a track that I can go, okay, this is a great starting point, I'm going to do this. When everyone can do that, you and I love music and you're a far better musician than I ever was, but one of the biggest limitations in creating music is understanding the software and going through, and mastering itself is a 10-year skill where you got to spend 10 years just to learn how to master a track. This is going to be, you tell an AI, master this track, it's done. So then the skill, the thing that's going to be valued in this future is going to be realism. And going back to like your point, there's going to be an even bigger pushback towards what's real, what's an actual real photograph, what is a real authentic moment. This is why I don't necessarily fear for, like, say, wedding photographers, right? Because what's going to happen is this hyper stylized photography that's currently popular within wedding photography, crazy lights, I think that's going to actually go the other way, where it's like, well, AI can create that. What we want now is more realistic moments, more of those moments captured and documented as they happened. And I think the same thing's going to happen with journalism. The same thing's going to happen with every possible arena of like, well, if a 3D printer could create this, then it's that much more meaningful to see an artist working, to see those things happening in real life. So I think there's going to be a really big pushback towards what's real, what's physically standing in front of you, what's actually there, as opposed to what could be created through technology.
And it's pretty wild to think that in today's age, vinyl records are the #1 platform for music to be bought in today's age.
That's crazy.
We've made music a commodity now to where streaming services, you listen to anything that you want. I think the artists are making very, very little money. And the only people, like I started a record collection just kind of to more or less collect and definitively hold a physical thing that says I am willing to support this artist because I like them, but then also to pass that collection on to my kids. Now, maybe my kids will never value it, but there's something about having these albums that mean so much to me. And so I've started buying vinyl, which is kind of an inconvenient art form, right? Like I only get 4 or 5 songs per side, and you got to flip it, and it's, you know, there's an argument, does it sound better or not? But it's not, it's just interesting to think about vinyl records or like classic cars. I think the next big phase we're going to see is everyone's going to have self-driving cars, and at some point in the near future, it's very probable and likely that you're not going to be able to get insurance to cover you driving a traditional car, and governments might say that you're such a liability to be driving a car that we don't want you driving a car. So what will happen to these classic cars? They're going to become more rare, and it's going to be harder to own them and possess them and have them in pristine condition. But there's probably always going to be a subculture. And like you're saying with wedding photography, maybe classic cars become even more valuable because we've weeded them out, and now people don't drive at all. Yeah. That to actually invest and appreciate this art form, vintage guitars are kind of like that. Or homes that are built by, you know, classic architects. You know, you're going to say this was designed early on and it was designed by a brilliant designer, and there's always something there that becomes more valuable as, you know, AI design becomes popular and homes are just built with 3D printers. I mean, that's already happening, but they're now designed in ways that are so spectacular and crazy that maybe going back to the real original form is going to hold more value than something that is kind of made into a commodity like we're seeing with say, music.
Yeah, but the flip side to that is that those areas where we push back and go back towards analog, go back towards these, those are always like the 10% of the economy type, you know, subdomains, right? Film versus digital. Film is maybe 10%, probably more like 2 or 3%. The rest is, so what's crazy is that the 90% to 98%, that's why I'm saying the 1% of people that are at the top of their craft, at the top, those people are safe because there's going to be this pushback towards what's real, and that's going to be even more valued. But that's going to represent, at best, 10% of the market, you know, more likely 2 to 3%. And what ends up happening is that the number of people that are trained and skilled at that keeps going down until the remaining people are, you know, their prices are so high that their commodities are really only accessible to the ultra wealthy. I mean, you brought up the idea of like homes and whatnot. In LA, you can go and see these areas where they built these craftsman homes. These were homes that were just beautiful, like, you know, they're nothing like a contemporary home. They're quite a bit darker, but they have this ornate detailing and beautiful wood design, and they're incredible. But if you try to find someone that is trained as a craftsman home builder, you're going to be looking forever. The few remaining craftsman builders are working for the ultra rich, building, you know, very few of these things because there's no money in it until you get to that place, to that top 1%. So the rest just focus on, you know, the homes that we live in. So these things die off until, you know, you have this basically endangered area that only the ultra rich at that point can appreciate. And that's kind of this over the last month, that's kind of what I've been grappling with AI, is like, it's pushing everything in that direction and there's no stopping it. Like, you know, if you're an average copywriter, you're in trouble. And an average copywriter does good work. You know, I'm not saying that it's not good work, but Jarvis can now do as good. So why deal with another human? Why have to worry about paying more? And same thing on the AI art, same thing on like the photography side, when you know, the retouching can be done with just a few words. It's just going to completely transform the dynamics.
I was thinking some of the, somehow in my career, the most widely viewed photographs that I've ever taken have actually been in this kind of weird like social commentary art. Mm-hmm. I did this stun gun photo shoot where I tased people with a stun gun and then we filmed them and took pictures. Yeah. And that became like the most widely viewed thing I've ever done. But then I also did one where it's called American Christmas, where I took pictures of people who had gotten guns for Christmas. And they went out to the firing range on Christmas Day to shoot these new guns. And I called it American Christmas. And I took pictures of people in front of the American flag. Like, this is like, I'm just like adding all the elements to try to make some kind of viral, you know, political, like, how do you view these images without myself? Yeah, without me actually taking a stance on one way or another. And so I thought it would be interesting to throw in that prompt into AI to see what it would create, just out of curiosity. And I've gotten these images here, and they look like these old classic paintings, and they're interesting. But in no way would I think people would have the same response to a painting or AI art the way that they do when they see a family with their little toddler on the firing range with these AR-15s and semi-automatic guns and rifles and everything.
Yeah.
There's something about social commentary that makes the real photography that much more powerful. And I think one of the most vivid images of this that I can remember from recently is that picture of Kathy Griffin where she's holding the Trump head, and there's the blood, and like she was canceled and everyone freaked out and people were saying she needs to go to prison, she's inciting violence and threatening to assassinate our president. That image like completely changed her career, right? She's had to come out and apologize, and I don't even know that she's doing anything. And so I threw that script into AI as well, and what it produced is an image that's like crazy how good this looks, but at the same token, it doesn't give you the same response at all. Like if you posted this on Instagram at the same time when the real photo came out, I don't think anyone would say that's a painting, a drawing, that's weird. But you take a photograph of her doing it, and all of a sudden it's so much more visceral and real and offensive, to the point where I think at the time when this came out, Twitter was having a debate on whether or not this should be censored, And so I just found it really interesting in this kind of social commentary art form.
I agree with you right now, though, but like, isn't that a limitation of the technology? Like, when you can't distinguish the AI art from the photograph, then does what you're saying still hold up?
Well, I think that gets us into an even scarier place where you start to say, where is AI art going? And you start thinking about when it's indistinguishable from human art. I mean, you start getting into the deep fake world. You start getting into, we talk about fake news now. Imagine when you can't differentiate what you're seeing. You're seeing Biden do something that looks very, very real in photo or video format. Political propaganda. This sort of stuff is more powerful than what I think the mind can possibly comprehend. I think if you go back to World War II, you might be able to say, I'm smart enough to know that this propaganda is propaganda. But how far can we stretch this medium to where the mass, it's kind of like is it Orson Welles? What was the tape recording that went on the air where people didn't know that there wasn't real aliens landing and people freaked out?
But I'm saying we're there. I'm saying, like, in terms of AI generated art, again, imagine 100,000 people learning a craft at once. Maybe that's a year, 2 years from now. We're already in the world of deep fakes. We're already we're there. The next 3 to 5 years, you're not going to be able to distinguish the difference between those two.
I've always thought that it feels like here in America that our society is crumbling with this political debate on what side of the aisle you're on. And so it feels like social media is kind of to blame for that. But I think as we start to see this AI art get stronger, because you have to think this isn't just like an American thing, and this isn't just for fun and just to be artistic freedom. There's going to be some other groups and people that are going to use this, to more negative elements and to for our demise maybe.
Anything. It's going to be. And so you're going to type in, "Give me a video of two people having sex." Like you can create porn with a few lines. And have it be realistic.
That might be a little more exciting. I'm talking. Yeah. What happens when it is show New York City being attacked, by a nuclear bomb, and or whatever it could be. Show a shooting going on in your local school, and you're thinking, how do you know if that's true or not? How do you know if that's really happening?
All of it.
That definitely seems like it's coming. And another thought that's kind of crossed my mind, and I don't know how you feel about this because you're on Instagram, which is now transitioning from photos to video and even these reels now, which seem to be competing with TikTok, which is a platform I'm not on at all at the moment, but you're very highly invested in. Do you think there is a point where we just become so desensitized from all media that nothing offends us anymore. It sure feels like the things that offend us today, oh my gosh. I mean, like, you remember like in the 90s when we watched rap videos and it's just girls shaking their butts, how offensive that was, or just talking about Snoop Dogg talking about smoking a joint. They would blurt that out and it was the most offensive thing and it's corrupting our culture. But today, if you were to turn on a music video that, it's not even really aired on a channel anymore, the stuff that's in our culture today that goes past that threshold to actually offend us is so much greater than where it was just 20 years ago. Do you think there's going to be a point where we're just so desensitized from everything? Is there going to be a point when our minds literally just don't care anymore?
Yeah, I definitely think that point would be coming. But it's weird because like right now you could say that in some ways we're hypersensitive and in other ways we're desensitized, right? Like when it comes to violence and especially movie-based violence, like every Marvel, we show our kids Marvel movies where hundreds of people die in every single movie, like that's kind of a wild thought. But they're technically PG-13, like, okay. And then, when it comes to like sex and the body, and we're becoming more desensitized on that. But on the same side, now we're hypersensitive where if you use the wrong pronoun, I hate you and I'm pissed off. So like on one side, we're becoming hypersensitive to things, and on the other side, we're completely desensitized. And I do believe that there's going to be like this. I brought the conversation of porn into it because of something that I recently heard in another podcast where they're talking about and they haven't even seen what these AI artwork programs can do yet. They were talking just about deepfake technology, right? Like, is copyright law going to catch up with the usage of people's faces? Because what they were talking about is how you could just use someone's face and do a deep fake and basically place them into a porn scene. Like you could take a celebrity, and they're already doing this, right? Well, currently copyright law doesn't have anything to cover this or to capture it. And it's with deep fake right now, you have to have some skill to do it. But again, with where AI art is going, what I'm saying is that we're 3 to 5 years away from literally typing in something that you want and you can get it in any medium, whether it's music, whether it's video, whether it's written form, whether it's an image, and it's going to look undistinguishably real. 3 to 5 years is my bet, but maybe it's 10 years. Either way, it's in the next decade. We're going to get there. And then at that point, what do? Like, do you just turn it all off? Like to what you're saying, like maybe we just stop using social media altogether because it's just so obnoxious. It becomes, but the point is you could generate something on any topic, any image, any whatsoever. Then what's the use of all of it? Do you just shut it all down? But the value of seeing your vision as something realistic right now, that going back to your American Christmas with the gun example, right? The value of that being a real photograph versus being AI art, that to me is going to be indistinguishable within just a few years. The AI art will look the same, and then the realism of the photograph will no longer matter. The social commentary will still play a piece, but again, social commentary is interesting because of the work that goes into something, the creation aspect of it. When that's on everybody's fingertips, do we just get annoyed with these messages over and over? It's like how many comedians refuse to tell Trump jokes because it was just such low-hanging fruit. Everybody can tell Trump jokes, so those jokes are just no longer valuable.
Yeah.
And that's where I see like basically every creative endeavor going. Everybody can do it. So what's valuable becomes, the bar gets raised so high that only the 1%ers can reach it.
Well, we'll find out soon. You've mentioned the copyright thing with the deep fakes, and I don't know that we've had a conversation about us as a society of how far into somebody's likeness, because I think before you took a photo of LeBron James and you threw it on some kind of product and you didn't get the proper license from the photographer and you're using his actual likeness, there's kind of a very clear, although dirty, connection between A and B. But when you get to the point when you can create a likeness of somebody, maybe this is happening most in video games, you're creating a likeness that the likeness is only there because of the way that we identify humans from a memory standpoint with their face. But you could make the argument that that is not LeBron James, even though it looks identical to him.
Yeah.
Where is that line? Before it's like, well, we took renderings of him, or we took pictures, or we had him in the studio and he plays the character in the video game. But when you have somebody who looks identical, but it's not referencing the photos, or you can't prove that it's referencing the photos, that's really a sticky place to be. With copyright, I want to kind of move into copyright, and that'll be the final thing we talk about here, because I think this is really interesting. It's basically who owns these images, and I've hinted at, I use the same prompts that Pratik has used to create some of these interesting images. Yeah. I did one where he has a beautiful image of like how life begins if we were created out of wire. And so with Midjourney, in many ways, you can find their user profile and you can find the prompts, and they're not necessarily hidden. I just threw that in there, and I came up with images that look very similar. I also threw that same prompt into other programs besides Midjourney, and you can see how some of these just completely fall apart. It's like wires, and then other ones, it's not beautiful at all. It feels like the technology's a little, a few years behind or a few months behind. But in this case of this one here that you see the two Indian women, this is another one that he created that's really beautiful. The version that I created is not really that different than what he did.
For sure.
And so you start to think, well, who owns the rights to this final image? Is it the software? Is it Pratik? Does he own any kind of exclusive use over these keywords in this specific phrase? Is it like a lyric where you could copyright it? This conversation is really interesting to me. And so I have written down, and you have this too, I've written down like Midjourney's terms and conditions. I'll put these on the screen, so if you want to pause them and read them. But basically it says that they retain the copyright, but then they also give you a copyright or usage if you're a paid subscriber. But if you're not a paid subscriber, then it sounds like they are the only ones who really own the copyright to this. But in some cases, they're giving you here the Creative Commons attribute so that you can use this however you want. And then depending on how you pay, you might get a commercial use to where you or your company could use it. But what's most interesting, and I'll leave this open-ended so that you can kind of give your opinion on this, it seems like the U.S. Copyright Office has declined to give any sort of protection on real copyright to anything that is not actually created by a human. This is from an article on the Register. I'll put a link to this in the description below.
That would make sense to me from the standpoint of, it feels like the only thing that would be patentable, copyrightable, would be the code itself going into the software, not what the software is generating.
Right, and so, it's just a very gray area. On one hand, it feels like Midjourney is giving you the copyright, but it also feels like that maybe the U.S. copyright law hasn't gotten far enough to say if there is actually a real copyright to be had.
Yeah.
And so, you've had our friend Mike Kelly's had images that look identical in theme and concept and execution, all the planes leaving an airport. And people have copied that idea, but as you know, you can't copyright an idea. You can only copyright the actual work. And so what happens when the work gets reduced down to just keywords? I mean, it's a very strange, slippery slope here where you want to protect the artist in some way, but it also feels like you just alluded to, the real value is the software that Midjourney has made themselves, and maybe they should own the copyright because their software is actually creating and executing the medium itself.
Yeah, I don't know the answers to that other than I know that copyright law is already decades behind, and the infrastructure to enforce it is even further behind. I mean, copyright law hasn't even caught up for all the social media, Social media has, like, you shouldn't be able to just go and take someone's video and go publish it on your own, channel type thing. And you shouldn't be able to, but you can. You can do all those things, and copyright law really isn't there, and the infrastructure isn't there to, like, really support much. And now we're going to a territory where, like, it almost just becomes completely invalidated. I mean, if I can say, I'm going to do this just to mess with our friend, but I'm going to go and type in, show me Mike Kelly's airplanes as a whatever illustration, right? Is that my creation? Is it Mike Kelly's creation? His name was used to generate it. Is it the software's creation? Like we're going to go to a territory that not only has the laws not caught up to it, it's completely unenforceable because the infrastructure isn't present. And then the amount of media generated makes it virtually impossible. I mean, when anybody can slap LeBron James' photograph onto whatever they want, who do you go after? Like a bunch of people that have no money to go after? Any copyright is only really enforceable. Like, you can ask someone to take something down, but we're talking about compensation really can only come from when there's a commercial usage where I can actually show, hey, someone's made money off this and these are the damages done. And now I can get, but when everybody's doing it, what are you going to do? Are you going to go sue 100,000 people? Like, it becomes impossible to enforce. So to me, this is one of those areas that again kind of gets just washed out. You fall into like if you're a copyright lawyer, like what the hell do you do? You're going to get infringement cases for the next 10 years. You're going to start seeing like, oh, now there's 10 of these a day. Tomorrow there's like 100 of these. Now every day I'm getting 1,000 infringement. What do I do with this? And none of them are enforceable. There's no money behind any of them ever being made.
Well, what's going to happen is they're just going to take these people as clients and they're going to do the proper, cease and desist, and they're going to take their fee. And guess who's holding the bag? The person who feels like the offense, should be rewarded, or paid out. I mean, how many times have I just got to the point where I stopped doing certain copyright things because I'm like, I'll never track this person down. We'll never get paid for it.
Exactly.
And the only one making money is the lawyer, and there's other times
where
their
fees up front, but if they're on spec, then
I just feel like, they're going to be smart enough not to be doing that. They're going to only say, hey, I can go after this guy if you want, but how are you going to prove, this is another part of this conversation, is how do you prove what images were inputted into the AI to begin with? In Midjourney's terms, it's really interesting. It says that they own the copyright. It says specifically, by using the services, you grant Midjourney, its successors and assignees to perpetual, worldwide, non-exclusive, sub-licensable, no-charge, royalty-free, irrevocable copyright license to produce the derivatives, and it also says in here somewhere, and images that you have input into the services, which says, what happens when you use an image that you don't own the copyright to? Yeah. It's kind of like, I guess, a song, if you put a sample of a song into, and then all of a sudden you release it and you're like, well, 5 years later you're sued because you aren't the originator of that music. It's just, I don't know. It's like Midjourney is putting out their terms out here to make you feel comfortable or not comfortable in using their services. But so much of the case study behind it isn't even there. Like you said, decades behind. How are you going to prove this stuff? I don't know. But photographers will get really upset reading these terms, or maybe they'll feel reassurance reading these terms, but is it just kind of a bunch of nothing that they're just putting something out there that hasn't actually been tried and tested yet?
I don't know, dude, but I don't envy, copyright lawyers being smart enough to know. That's one thing, and I'm sure they are smart enough to know, but when you're being flooded with 10,000 copyright infringement cases like nonstop, it's not really about being smart enough to know. It's about how the hell do I filter out what's real and what's not real? Like, how do I actually get to the real clients? It's just so wild, the implications that this has across every, not only creative industry, but the industries that those creative industries touch, right? Because it'll be, from the way that we're going to capture, you come in to do a headshot, or if you come in to do a portrait work, or you imagine this, what if as your photographer, I'm your portrait photographer, and I say, Patrick, you don't even need to come in, just send me one of your recent selfies and I'll design the photograph from the comfort of my desktop. And it's going to look awesome and completely different than anything that you have. It's going to be completely professional, but you don't need to actually come in. I just need a basic structure of what your face looks like.
Yeah. Well, so that kind of leads me to like the absolute last thing I want to talk to you about. I know our time's kind of coming to an end here. Is who is going to make money with AI? Is it going to be early adopters? Pratik's already created an Instagram account that's got amazing imagery. Could you be somebody like people who has like, you hit it hard early on and you have these one-off images and you've learned how to market and make NFTs or whatever the newest, trendiest thing is, and you're making these one-off prints? Is it going to be somebody like you were suggesting where you get a headshot done, but they have access to an AI algorithm that is quarantined to where the average person can't get the look or aesthetic or database that you have access to, and therefore you're able to create something through AI, but in this like protected realm? Are we going to have companies that are selling licenses to give you more or less access? I wonder. Somebody is going to make money. You're going to see in the next year, you're going to see this is the most expensive piece of IR ever sold. And it's going to create a bunch of debate. And there are going to be people that have made careers out of this. And then there's going to be others who have said, my art looks better than these people, yet nobody knows who I am. So I feel like marketing is probably going to be a huge part of this and who it is. I had a little talk the other day with a friend, and it was like, if you could use the same prompt and you create a piece of art, but then Elon Musk puts that in and he creates a piece of art, which piece of art do you think is going to be worth more if you put it on the market for sale?
Yeah.
It's going to be Elon Musk. And so I find this conversation interesting, not just because of AI, but this is how it is in the real world with photography as well. How many photographers do you know that have, sold images for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars in licensing or whatever it is, and the image is just okay. But
Sure.
then other people that you feel like are true artists, yet they are never able to make a dime. Where do you think the value is going to be in AI? And do you think there's going to be artists out there that, not if you think, but how are the artists that are going to be successful selling this? What do you think they're going to do to kind of break that mold and cross that
Yeah, so I
chasm?
think number one, the people that are going to make the most money from this are the platforms themselves. So the people that have designed the software, they're gonna make the 90% of the revenue in this, and I think that 90% is going to be by and large a transfer from all the 99% of creatives that I mentioned that aren't quite. They're good,
Yep.
but they're not creating stuff that's like completely unique. I think it's going to be a transfer of wealth from all those over to these AI companies as consumers just realize that I'd rather spend $30 a month and make stuff that's fun and do it on my own than, go and commission any of these things, right? So I think there's going to be a huge transfer of wealth on that side, and it's going to go the majorities of the platforms. I do think that there is, in the spaces of like NFTs, and I think there's money to be made every time there's something completely new. For a time, there's money to be made, in those spaces, like with NFTs. But for the most part, like, I also believe that those are like fly-by-night type operations. Like those that are selling and making NFTs and putting the artwork and stuff, it's like a bandwagon hype thing where quickly, and it already has happened with NFTs, you start to realize that it's really not worth what people claim it to be. It's not an appreciating asset. It's not anything. It's just the hype train that we bought into. It's the new version of tulips, right? I do believe that NFTs are kind of that for the most part until there's a place where, like in Ready Player One, they talk about the oasis, like the place where everybody, that broad platform that everybody uses to get online and to get to that place. That's what's going to make an NFT valuable, is when there's the platform, when there's a place to actually give utility to the NFT, then those NFTs actually are worth something. But until then, just like useless NFTs are nothing. I do believe, though, that every one of these creative tools does create the potential for making money for the creative, but it's going to come from a little bit of a different. It's not just about making the music. It's not just about making the art or making the photographs. It's going to become even more so about having a message, creating a platform, and building a brand and a sort of identity behind who you are and what it is that you do. Like an image, let's say an image of, I have a lot of these psychological concepts, right, that I've done through AI. One of those images is two children silhouetted looking through a window of their parents fighting. It's just an illustration. But in and of itself, it's not worth anything because someone else can do that. But behind a platform where, let's say, I'm creating children's books that help them to understand psychological concepts that are deep and meaningful. Now I have a platform and a message that I can tie this to. And if I create a book with 30 of these with illustrations and messages to them, then I've created something that goes far beyond simply just a piece of one of those images. I've created something that has value. And I think anything that you can derive that has genuine value from these AI-based tools will mean that you can make a living doing it, will mean that you can do really well doing it. It's just understanding that the technical ability is no longer what gets you paid. But that's okay, because if you're a photographer, then you've known this already. Like, you should know this. Again, when you talked about when film went to digital, Greg Lee Heiser talked about we used to be technicians, right? And then most everybody could do it. And to some extent, we still are technicians, but every piece of that technical ability starts to be whittled away until technology leaves you with just, what do you want to communicate? And that's the value that you would be bringing at that point. What do I want to say? What is my message? What is the value that I can bring to this conversation, to this medium, to whatever it is? And if you have that, you have it dialed in, and you know this purpose and message, and you know how to communicate and build an audience, then regardless of who you are, I think there's a substantial way to make an income and a living doing it.
Yeah, as you're talking about this, my mind's going crazy. I'm just thinking, like, could you do some kind of pop-up store where you go in and have an experience, and the experience relies on a subscription to Midjourney, but people go in with goggles and type in keywords, or they
Totally.
tell you what you want to experience, and you're typing in the keywords, and at the end, a print is made, and you buy the print, and it's like you said, an experience. Something like that could be really interesting. But then how soon until that becomes a novelty? You know, you need something more substantial to where, I think that's why your platform is so exciting, is because this gives you the perfect tool. I am guessing you've already made a subscription?
Yeah, and I've created several of these pieces that are being like incorporated into our content, and that was one of the thoughts that I had, was like, if I wanted to create that children's book, or these illustrations and guides and all that stuff, now you can do that immediately. Anybody, that's the beauty in it, is that if you are writing a script for a film, you don't need a storyboard artist anymore to bring that those ideas to something that can be translated and understood. So it gives you a lot of power, but now we have to understand that the value in each of these things gets distilled down to the story, the message, the brand, the identity. The value keeps getting distilled until the what you have left is simply the human element that can't be replaced. For a wedding photographer, that value is me sitting down with you and understanding who you are and what it is that you personally value, and ensuring you that when it comes to your wedding day, that I'm going to be the person to capture what's real and in front of us and authentic to you, but through a creative eye. That's the value that has and always will be my job as a professional wedding photographer. Where we go wrong is thinking like that our job as a wedding photographer is composition and lighting. It's not. Those are expectations, and those will get whittled away. Those technical abilities get whittled away with each new evolution in technology, and this latest one is going to do it at a pace that we've never seen before.
Do you find enough value in AI art that you would ever print any of these and actually put them on your wall, or is that something that doesn't really interest you? I was thinking, could you have a live photo frame and just have all of your family feed into it? And so like every day there's just new art that maybe some of your kids would produce art. Like, we can't display this, but do you think you would use art in that way with this?
I would, for sure. I mean, some of the pieces that I've created, I really do enjoy looking at. And yes, I've thought about printing them. I've thought about, already putting up like a display to be able to show them. In 10 years, you're going to walk into everybody's homes and it's going to be their own artwork on the wall, like their own AI generated artwork on the walls, as opposed to. But then maybe that's what, again, drives us back towards when you have a real photograph by Patrick Hall and it's sitting up on the wall. That's what gives it that much more value. But it's not because it looks real. It's because it's by Patrick Hall. It's the brand. It's the identity behind it, the messaging that comes with it, whatever that messaging might be that makes it valuable. And that's where we have to, again, retool as artists to understand that it's no longer, because I can make, an image that looks real, that looks like Patrick Hall's, but it's not yours. And it's not. So that's the authenticity and the piece that has to come through that we have to recognize as artists.
Well, I'm still waiting for that day where those pieces of artwork that I've created are worth that kind of value that you're describing. But I really enjoy this conversation. I feel like this is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, there's so many other things to talk about. The list is endless, but For those who are listening, you've got your hand in a lot of different things. Is there something that people can tap into that's either photo related or relationship wise? Like where can people find some of the other stuff that they might not be familiar with?
Yeah, well, I'm just an educator. I kind of create and educate in different spaces, but since this is mostly a photography platform, all of our photography education is available through SR Lounge. It's basically everything you'd need to be a full-time professional portrait and wedding photographer, from the creative aspect to the business aspect. They can also find me just at Pydris on Instagram. It's kind of just my personal page, but that's about it.
Well, this was really fun and exciting. I enjoy having conversations with you as always. I'm also looking forward to hearing the interview you did with Pratik Nayak, because I have a feeling that his perspective is a lot different than mine.
Yeah.
And to hear your conversation with him, that's on Adorama TV, or will be soon?
It'll be, it will be, or it already is on Adorama TV. But yeah, that was a fun one too. And I think Pratik has a little bit more of both of us are very pragmatic. I think Pratik's a little more positive and optimistic about where it's going and whatnot. But yeah, check that out for sure.
Thanks again for doing this with me. And if you guys have any questions or comments, I would love to hear from the audience as well. This is going to be a topic that we're going to have to definitely explore many more times. So if there's something we said that really resonates with you, leave it in the comments, and then I'm sure we'll hit those up and continue the conversation there. So,
thanks.
All right. Well, thank you, buddy. It's good talking to you.
Thanks for having me. See you guys.